morning. Happy Halloween and happy birthday to Tony. First of all, I want to thank him for stepping up today and speaking on his birthday. And I'm very excited as well that we've got some in-house faculty speaking in the seminar. And I honestly don't know where to start to summarize Tony's outstanding contribution to the world's fisheries science. So he was the founding director of the Fisheries Center in the 1990s. He has received many prestigious awards, among others the Babbington Medal for lifetime contributions to fisheries science. He's a founding editor of the journal Fish and Fisheries, and he has worked for the FAO. So his research, as you all know, focuses on fisheries restoration and towards policies improving biodiversity conservation and human benefits. And today Dr. Pitcher will talk about evaluating the ethics and sustainability of fisheries. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pitcher.
Thank you, Anna. I was encouraged to try and wear some sort of appropriate costume for today. Fortunately, I see nobody in the audience is wearing anything like that. It took me back to the point once in my career back in Oxford. I actually once gave a lecture just in my underpants. It was actually quite strange, but there we are. So I thought, well, perhaps I could rip it. No, perhaps not. At this advanced age, it might not be quite so exciting as it was back then. There you are. This talk is actually, I apologise to FISH500 people because they've probably heard part of this before. And it's actually based on a talk that I gave in Glasgow Marine Conservation Congress back in August. That's why I thought I'd get rid of the logo, but then I realised it's quite interesting for a sort of giant puffin navigating a Viking ship, catching a salmon at the same time, mounted on one of those squirrely Celtic motifs that's quite attractive, I suppose, in the sea. I thought I'd leave it because it's kind of odd and rather nice. So, to move on, fisheries sustainability and ethics. This is actually part of a much larger investigation of the ethical status of fisheries and how you might measure it in a semi-quantitative fashion and reproducible in a scientific way. And that project is being led by Anne. And so this is my contribution to that larger project. And it's really, this talk's designed to try and test a hypothesis that actually sustainability of a fishery is related to its ethical status. So the hypothesis is sustainability correlated with ethics. And we could finish right now, because you could say by definition that a sustainable fishery is an ethical one and an ethical fishery is a sustainable one. So we could finish the talk right here, but that would be a bit premature. So I've kind of not accepted the by definition explanation. Is there some simple correlation between ethical status and sustainability status is what I'm going to address here. And then towards the end of the talk, we're going to look at a more complex way of looking at it to try and unpack some of the indicators of status, both ethical and ecological, if you like, to see if there's some relationship there. So what can we use as an indicator of ecological sustainability? Well, I thought I'd go to the wonderful Kobe plot, and we'll start off by talking about Kobe plots, because there's a really nice online source for many of them these days. And then the ethical status, how will we measure that? Well, again, there are indicators of ethical status, and in this talk I'm going to use some of those. But there are more complex ways of looking at ethical status, and I'll have a very brief mention of some of the more complex ways of unpacking what is ethics. So the simple hypothesis testing, using the simple approach to it, is using 13 case studies. So this is very preliminary work. It's only 13 case studies. Obviously, these days you've got to have far more case studies than that to be respectable. So this is pilot work, not published yet. And then to look at the more complex one, I've got 2 case studies in a little bit more detail, and then some conclusions, I guess. The Kobe plot, if you look at Kobe on the web, on Google, you'll get all these photographs of this big hunky guy. So the plot is not named after the baseball player. It's actually it's not baseball. I think it's American football, whatever that is. Basketball. Darn it. You see, I'm a cricket fan, and there's none here. So no problem. Okay, so it's not him. It's that Japanese city, that a big industrial Japanese city that was virtually flattened in a big earthquake about 10 years ago. And there was a meeting there of all the people who worry about tuna assessment around the world in 2007. And it was there that they said, well, let's use this simple plot as indicator of the status of our tuna fisheries. And this is the plot that was published by Mark Maunder and others in the output from that meeting. And so what they said is that we should be able to divide up the simple plot, we'll look at it in more detail in a moment, and show areas that are good, and areas that are terrible, and areas that are intermediate in terms of the sustainability status of the tuna fishery. And you can see there that this tuna fishery this is from somewhere in the Pacific, and it's tracked across from the green area, which is like a good, nice place to be, and it goes up here towards the middle, which is where it's supposed to be for sustainability, and the confidence limits overlap the crossing point here, which is presumably quite good. Although, of course, the confidence limits do actually include some red, which is a terrible area to be in on the Kobe plot. So that was what was published, and it's been very widely adopted by lots of our stock assessment colleagues and others as an indicator of what's going on. So to look at it in a bit more detail, here's the Kobe plot. It plots the biomass of the fish stock that you're looking at against the fishing rate, which can either be catch per unit effort, or it can be fishing mortality rate, or it could be effort as well, actually. It varies in different fish. But, and the two axes go from, as is conventionally the case, from low to high. And so the plot is divided up into regions where, to the left and right, and above and below, the point where biomass is equal to the biomass that it would be at MSY, classic MSY point. And that, again, varies a little bit with who's doing it, so whether they take MSY or some other reference point. But basically, whether it's above or below the reference point in terms of biomass, and above or below the reference point in terms of the fishing rate or fishing mortality rate. So that gives 4 quadrants. And this is where it was divided up. This one down here is okay, it's green, nice place to be. This one here is awful. Everything's too low a biomass and too high a fishing rate. And then these two are intermediate. And it varies whether people call this one worse than that one, or whether yellow is better than yellow is worse than pink. I don't know. And some people colour them the same colour. So there's a bit of argument there. But I've taken this as meaning okay with score in my sustainability status terms. I give a simple score if it's in the green square of 4 out of 4, and awful would be, I think, 1 out of 4 or 0 out of 4. And score. So the complex work that went into drawing that Kobe plot for a particular fishery translates in my terms just a simple score, whether it's from 1 to 4. Bad. So some case studies chosen to try and do this. First of all, I went to the Rand Myers Legacy Database based in Dalhousie, and I struggled with that because I don't speak SQL very well. And then I found that our colleagues down south of the border in Seattle have set up the most wonderful animated website of Kobe plots. In fact, they're animate. You can go onto the web and they animate, they actually jump about and move. And it's like really great fun. And you can get all of the data, you can all the data in tables, and it sucks the data down in CSV files. And so you can actually, it's really very nice. I have some criticism of that site, which I won't mention here unless somebody asks me about it, but it is actually very good. It's the best one I've seen for getting Kobe plots from all around the world. So I chose, for this particular pilot piece of work, just 13 to 15 case studies, and they're plotted here on the Kobe plot. And there's one, this is the Newfoundland cod, which is very low biomass, but still nevertheless very low fishing mortality rate related to MSY. And the North Sea cod is a contrast, where the biomass is terribly low, and the fishing rate is still, when the Kobe plot was drawn, was still very high. There's a BC fishery in here somewhere, BC sable fishes, and oh look, it's near the middle. And some so-called underfished fisheries where, like the South African jackman, which is high biomass, low fishing mortality rate. So I tried to choose some points that were in each of the quadrants. This quadrant proved a bit of a problem, but I did the best I could quickly. And I could probably do better later, picking more of these case studies. So that's my status from sustainability in ecological terms. And then the ethical status, well, that could be done from some sort of synoptical ethical analysis using ratfish or the matrix, the ethical matrix, which is another way that's been used to try and evaluate status. At the moment, those two are probably going to be merged by NIMI, which I haven't done it yet, so I wouldn't use that. So mainly in this talk, I'm going to use some of the surrogates for ethical status, which may or may not be good. The best one, I think, is the one published by you. But surprisingly, yeah, the best one's published by me, right? So that is compliance with the United Nations FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, which we published in 2009, I think. And that is the result of 42 questions. That's a good, nice number. 42 questions which cover the Article 7 of the UN Code of Conduct and expressed compliance with that code. And of course it is an ethical code because the Code of Conduct is by definition an ethical code. So, and in fact, if people really complied with it, the fisheries of the world would be in a wonderful state. They don't. So that their score, and the compliance score, turns out to be quite a useful index of their ethical status. And then you can do a quick and dirty one, which we did, which isn't published, good enough to be published, but we've done a quick and dirty one for various places. There's a Fisheries Management Quality Index published by Camilla Mora, and I think I discovered I was a co-author on that, so I better not say that it's a bit dodgy. But and then there's a wonderful corruption index published by Transparency International. It's a US agency that, well, we think we know who funds it, but it claims to be independent. And it's used by business people around the world to discover, you know, if they're going to do business in the new country, they look up the corruption index to see how much they might have to. Local costs, as they're called, might come in. And there's also an even worse thing run by the CIA called the Failed State Index. Syria doesn't do very well right now, but Canada doesn't do as well as you might think, actually, on that score. Have a look at it. There's also the Governance Index, quite a complex index, which is the average of 6 sub-indices published by the World Bank, and that comes out, I think, every 2 years. That's updated. So these are all surrogates for the ethical status of the fisheries in that country. Some of them better than others. And just to show you that if you take the UN Code of Conduct compliance score on the horizontal axis and plot it against the quick and dirty ethical status score that we developed, then you can see there's a very high correlation. It's about 80% COD, so that's actually quite good. Unfortunately, this score is not very independent. So let's proceed to see if we can test our hypothesis using initially the Kobe plot. I'm going to use the standard Kobe plot. I'm going to use other things in a moment, but just go with the basic Kobe plot as originally published. So it's got these 4 status areas that get a score depending on which quadrant they're in. I'm not quite sure what this white line means. I think that's a mistake. It's not. We don't mean that there's a little corridor in there that means you don't get any score at all. It's just a glitch in the PowerPoint. So we can plot our data on top of that, and there they are. So you can see, I was quite generous. I gave, if a fishery was on the borderline, I gave it the better score. So it was kind of generous, right? Now the ethical index is the Kobe-Pot quadrant is going to determine which coloured zone you're going to be in. That's plotted against the various ethical indices. And so here they are. We've got the quick and dirty ethics score. We've got Kamala Morra's management quality score, and we've got the code of conduct compliance. And you can see that there is no hypothesis not supported. Right? There's no evidence from this pilot work that ethical status is correlated with sustainability. Oh bother! So try something else. The second method. Well, this is a Kobe plot diagram showing the sort of areas of quality from our colleague. It's Murdoch. So it's quite complex, and so I've coloured that in with qualities from good to bad, green through to purple is the worst. The purple is Murdoch's collapsed area. You can see Murdoch himself plots in the overexploited. At least he's not collapsed, right? So I guess he would probably prefer to be in the recovery. But anyway. So that's the quality from, and we can overlay that onto our test data. So it's sort of overlaid there on the test data from the Kobe plot, and I've had to extrapolate the areas for those that are outside the original, outside Murdoch's area. It's above 2 here on the exploitation axis. It's not in his plot, but it's assumed that these just carry on. And then we give them the scores. So giving them the scores, well, oh dear, quite pretty, but really not, again, not significant. Sadly, hypothesis not supported. So since then, I've found one other method, which comes from from down below the border. You can see he's giving me a nudge, probably a secret signal. This is Ray's way of doing it, right? So, there we are. Daniel's not here, so I was allowed to show this. There's been a red rag to a bull otherwise. And oh my goodness, he published this quite complex Kobe plot. This is the result, as far as I can understand the paper, this is the result of a series of simulations of a whole stack of fisheries whose details are based on material in the Myers database, but he simulated them with a complex simulation, looking at the probability of fisheries in different places on the Kobe plot, looking at the probability of them increasing and recovering, or just basically increasing from where they were. And so that's why the ones up here, where they already have a high biomass, are less likely to increase than the ones down here, where they had a low biomass. And the curious result, I mean, this is the result, the curious result is that it doesn't really bear much relation to the quadrants, the classical quadrants of the Kobe plot. It looks really as though the area of sustainability, the best areas down here, and probably an increase being a surrogate for sustainability is the assumption I'm making there, which is not particularly good. Anyway, so what I've done at the moment, rather hurriedly last night, is to draw these stripes, which are supposed to reflect, you could whine about that, actually, not perfect. So the quality, the sustainability status is from green across to purple on this plot. So I've given the scores to those bands at the moment. It may be that those bands are not terribly well drawn, but we could probably improve on that. And so in superimposing that on our Kobe plot case studies, well, okay, it looks pretty different. Does that have a better correlation with ethics? Well, as it happens, it sort of does. Well, these two are not significant, so I can't really show them, but I have shown them, because they support my instinct. But they're not very good. But this one actually is okay. It's a very weak, what is it, 28%? Yeah, it's a 28% R squared. So it's a little bit better than anything else we've seen. So the hypothesis is not really supported, but maybe maybe an indication of very weak support for the hypothesis. Maybe with more data, it will look better. Good hope. And that's as far as I've got with that simple testing so far. If anybody here has got a better Kobe plot area quality map, and I'm sure some of you have, Tom, and so it would be very nice if we could actually have another go with something that's a bit better considered. So we went on to try and look at a more complex, or at least a way of unpacking some of the details of these fisheries. And so we've, surprise, chosen my old technique of ratfish here, which has been updated recently. Here, the various sustainability indicators come from 6 fields in the ratfish analysis, which includes an ecological field, but also includes institutional, social, ethical fields themselves. And the ethical field is there, in fact. So the results are generally shown without merging the different fields. So we've got a hexagon, and the point that you are on the hexagon, the closer you are to the edge, the better it is. If you're right on the edge, you're perfect, so that never happens. So here's a couple of fisheries plotted here at random to see how they go, and you can see this one here has a very high ecological status and a reasonably high ethical status, whereas this one in here is poor in both. So we've tried to use ratfish. Ratfish itself, within the ethics, uses quite a complex analysis. There are 9 indicators scored to give an ethical status of a fishery, which includes adjacency, iconicity, which is the resonance that that fish has in the local society, such as like for here, salmon would be it, right? High iconicity, or cod on the east coast of Canada would have a high iconicity. Alternative livelihoods and other factors like just governance, illegal fishing, consumer attitudes to the fishery product are included in this ethical analysis. So it's quite a complex analysis, takes a bit of time to do. So one case study we've chosen here is BC sablefish. Here's its Kobe plot, which comes from the Myers database. And it starts off in a very nice place down here, but then as the fishery develops, it moves toward, it's actually not too bad. It goes towards the target point in the middle of the plot, and then jiggles about quite a bit. And that period when it's jiggling about from being overfished to being about right includes the recent period, probably about 15 years, I think, since it's been an ITQ fishery. So it doesn't get a lot better, but it doesn't get worse either, so that's quite neat. And it's, we've done it as a result of a big exercise last year, which included some students. We've plotted the ethical status of these fish, the ratfish plots for each of these fisheries, including their ethical status. And here it is for the 2 gear types in the sablefish fishery, which is a trap and a longline. Longlines are, I think, about 10 to 15% of the fishery. So most of the fisheries are from the traps. And it does quite well. I mean, it's up there in a really good area for ecological sustainability, both gear types actually. And it does quite well in ethics as well. So there's actually here, with this fishery, there's a correlation between ethical status and ecological sustainability. It does quite well. It doesn't do quite so well institutionally. But again, all of these scores for ratfish are actually quite in good areas. So it's a fishery that does quite well. So for sablefish, we can say, well, the status is actually quite good. There's some equivocal feelings about the ITQ in terms of their social impacts. The economics are very good, but the social equity of the ITQ, the consequences of the ITQ have been somewhat controversial. It doesn't get worse, like most fisheries do. It doesn't get dramatically better either. So our overall hypothesis is weakly supported by this fishery. But we didn't really see that until we unpacked those status indicators. My second example is courtesy of Nicholas. Oops, are you here? Oh, here. Oh, sorry, Nicholas. Anyway, this is his results that I've used here. And I'm sorry, but faculty members get to use their students' results. I'm afraid students are aware of it. But I have asked him if it's okay. And this is the congrio, the Chilean congrio fishery. It's usually mistranslated as congrio. It's not a congrio, it's a kinglet, a deep water fish related to the hakes, but it's not a hake, it's a separate family. And there are two big fisheries for kinglet in the world. One is in South Africa that's almost collapsed, and the other one is in Chile. Oh, I think there might be a New Zealand one as well, a small one. The other one is the main one is in Chile. And that one has been overfished, but it's not too bad, it's still there. And what Nicholas did was to decide to look at the status, both ecological and ethical, at the beginning of the Chilean dictatorship and in the present day. So we had two neat periods. We had a military dictatorship imposed by Pinochet. This is the day after he murdered the then president of Chile, funded by the Americans. And what they did, these guys are still alive, but what they did was to leave heaps of dead people at every bus stop, which is like, whoa. So the population was seriously encouraged to comply with whatever Pinochet wanted. And Pinochet actually owned a lot of fisheries in the end too. And then after that, there was a wonderful period after 1989, I think it was, when Pinochet actually was forced to step down and democracy was established. And this, I think, is the present-day president is a lady. I think her name is Bachelet. And so Chile is a very different place now to what it was under that awful dictatorship. So the congrio fishery for the kinglet is actually part of. It's one of the valuable bycatch species caught in the southern hake fishery, which is largely a trawl fishery, although there is a longline sector as well. So the data for the kinglet is not easily available. The data what I've used as a surrogate is the data for the hake fishery, which is one that is the actual target. So we've got a Kobe plot for that hake fishery, kinglet by surrogate, and you can see that it actually started off like most things in the green quadrant, and then shuffled rapidly up here. It was heavily exploited, but it's been trundling along and is still overexploited, but not drastically so. It's not gone. The biomass has not shot right down here. And the hope is, the assumption here is that this hake plot actually is a surrogate for the kinglet plot, which is not perfect, but it doesn't look too bad as the moment. If we look at its ratfish for the two periods, then we get a different kind of story. This is the ratfish analysis for under military rule, under Pinochet dictatorship, and this is the ratfish plot under democracy. You can see some quite important changes there between the two. First of all, the ecological status scores less today under democracy than it did under the dictator. Oh, that's interesting. The social status, again, scores less today than it did under the dictatorship. And why would that? Well, the institutional status is much better. The economic status also has gone down compared to what it was. So that's it. The institutional one is easy to explain because since democratization, there's been all sorts of effort put into the management of the fisheries to extend the governance to small-scale fishers, to local communities, and to far more groups of stakeholders than it ever was under the dictator, if the dictator just told them what to do. He didn't. What he told them to do was actually quite good because the ecological status has gone down as a consequence of having all these extra stakeholders, which is kind of a bit not quite what you wanted to see, I suppose. Economic value has gone down, and the social status is an interesting one, gone down in democracy. I don't know what that really is, but Nicholas's suggestion is that people today are much more argumentative, there's more social conflict, because everybody has a say. Whereas in the old days, people with different political views would come together as allies because they were all fighting a dictatorship. So it was kind of better for social cohesion to have a common enemy that you could unite against. Well, that's one hypothesis. So there we are with the kinglet. That's it. So again, the hypothesis here is not supported at all, that the ethical status actually is not correlated with changes in ecology or in some of the other indicators that we've looked at. But you don't see that unless you unpack these different sectors and modalities. So conclusions are, fisheries sustainability and ethics. Well, hypothesis not supported yet. I put the yet in because we're still working on this, right? The analysis clearly needs refinement. The Kobe plot is not so satisfactory as you might think. It's not, certainly the simple version of the Kobe plot is not working at all. More complex analyses using the Kobe plot of ecological sustainability status need to be developed. But you don't really see any of the interesting issues until you unpack both the ethical and ecological status fields. So in fact, it's another example of ugly facts flying in the face of elegant hypothesis. Thank you.
We've got some time for questions, and the students first again, and then anybody else can check it.
If no one else has a question, I just, if you have the hake data for the Chilean case study, why didn't you do a study in the hake fishery?
The hake fishery itself? Because we've not evaluated that using the ratfish technique.
Oh, the ratfish.
Yeah, we haven't done the ethical status of that. Yeah, the ethical status of the hake fishery would be an interesting study, sure, but it's not done yet. There are two sectors, and there's quite a conflict between the large-scale offshore trawlers, who are largely based in just one or two ports, and small-scale long-line fishermen who can catch hake and kinglet, coming from lots of shore-based small fishing communities. So there's a major social conflict there, and we've only got the scores for the congria, for the kinglet so far. Yeah, it's a good point. It'd be interesting to look at. And with hake, of course, there's a potential here for a worldwide study because there's hake fisheries all over the place, including, most people don't know, the biggest fishery in BC is actually for hake. So.
When you were looking at the ecological status of fisheries, I'm just wondering if you were just looking at the ecological state of that actual fish stock, or if you were looking at other fish in the same area.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. Within the ratfish technique, the ecological status is, includes some of the questions there include predator-prey interactions through the ecosystem and things like that. At one point, we actually used the trophic level change as the system, but we actually don't use that right now. But yes, there are a number of ecosystem-based questions in there, so it's not just the single species stock, whereas the Kobe plot, of course, is just that species. Amanda?
Is it okay?
Yeah, go for it.
She told me not to, Anna told me not to move. I have to stand here, you see. If you go away, you can't hear.
I wonder whether you might get some different responses to the comparisons with the Kobe plots if you didn't treat them as categorical. Well, you treated them almost as if they were continuous variables, but of course, you know, the way you allocated them, they're categorical variables. And a slight tweak left or right would change the category in which the fishery found itself. So I almost wonder whether the Kobe plot is inherently doomed with that approach. And then you try to take almost a regression analysis with categories, which creates its own drama.
Yeah.
And you know, either I think you'd have to, if you want to take that approach, you'd have to divide the Kobe plot into more sections to get a sense of the real distance between the fisheries. So
well, we could, yeah, you're quite right. We could use, and I had thought of this, we could have used the Kobe plot scores. But then the problem is there's two axes. So where do you...
Yeah, I don't think I might be doomed, but certainly creating categorical variables, but then treating them as continuous was likely.
Yeah, but there'd be a non-parametric test.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm more sanguine about using non-parametric tests than you are.
No, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, there's a question over there first.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was going to ask, so you studied the, on the 6 parameters, you had ecological, but within ethical you also had ecological?
Did we?
Yeah.
It could be right, but
Ecological damage.
Oh yeah, ecological damage.
right. Back here somewhere. Yeah, yes, right. It's, yeah. Ecological damage, yeah. So that is damage to the system, to habitat, and to both habitat and food web damage caused by fishing, usually by the fishing gear, or sometimes by the fishing practice, but usually by the fishing gear.
Wouldn't that just be in the ecological?
There is something like that in ecological for its ecological impacts, but here we're looking at the ethics of actually impacting both the food web and the habitat through the actions of the fishery. And we're thinking of trawl damage, obviously, and even long lines can. Recently, it's been shown that some of the long lines, which are thought to be quite pure, actually do hook big corals, and you can actually damage coral. It was thought that trawls were the main problem, damaging deep water corals. But long lines do as well to some extent. That's been recently shown. So we're thinking of that kind of damage to the system, which leaves the system less able, presumably, to continue to fulfill the expectations of humans in exploiting it. So that's why we thought it was ethical. That some aspects of that are ecology as well. You're right.
So it's kind of a follow-up to something Amanda said, and also just a general point. So as an example, I had to review a bluefin assessment recently. And over time, what happened in the Pacific is that UMSY, what you've got on your y-axis, and BMSY, what you've got on your x-axis, change a lot over time. Because MSY, maybe some people may not know this, is specific to a regime of fishing, like an age selectivity, a natural mortality rate, a recruitment scenario, all these things which are time dependent. So there is a different UMSY and BMSY over time, and it changes a lot. So it's not fixed. So whenever you see one of these plots, it is contingent on people saying in 2013 fishing looks like this forever, then this is what UMSY and BMSY. So it's a very changeable thing, and I'd just like to hear you comment on that. And also, that's something Matt said. Although the categorizations, they're categorical, these fixed points, you could, in most of these assessments, that line is a big smudge of uncertainty. So you can say, anyone state what the probability of being in any one of those quadrants is, and that turns it into a quantitative metric. So in the case of your saying, that's right in the convergence of those four sectors, it could say that although it is technically most likely to be overexploited, and it's 25% more or less in each quadrant.
And that has huge implications when you get into it.
Right, so actually what I'm saying, there is a way of dealing with it with the assessments. Anyway, I want to hear what you say about the uncertainty in these things and that kind of
Yeah, I mean, the uncertainty's there, and my feeble attempt to compensate for that was to be generous about where the point blobs sat, but because my blobs are really big, but deliberately so, big sort of sludgy blobs. But yeah, I mean, the Kobe, the original implication of Mauder's plot is that it's kind of fixed, and obviously that it's moving back from week to week, I suppose, certainly from year to year. And so that's a bit of an issue with that technique. I mean, I don't know how I'm not quite sure how you
It's a problem with
deal with it.
What's ethical today could be grossly unethical in 10 years' time, but how you change your fishing regime. And that's the problem with the whole concept of MSY. And it's there. And,
I agree with you on MS. I don't like MSY. All either, but it it's kind of stuck there in the literature. And people like Pam Mace keep telling us, writing papers saying how wonderful it is to use as a reference point. Oh, so yeah, I prefer biomass targets myself. Yeah, but if you've got suggestions about how, what relatively simple analysis would give a better quality score, then that would be very helpful. And something that's time-based, like if the Kobe plot is shifting year by year, then you should relate it to the year you're interested in, I guess. But then that means you've also got to make future projections, which is a bit of an issue. They all have all sorts of uncertainty all over the place. So the second question I didn't understand.
The second question was just, it wasn't a question, it was just
that's why I didn't
Amanda's point that you can get a quantitative score even though they're qualitative, they're categorical.
Yeah, right. Point taken.
One more question.
The forest of
Katerina had her hand up. Maybe we can squeeze in a second one.
Okay, I'll try to be very brief. I'm just like, it makes really a lot of sense to me that the Kobe plot and the results shown by the gold plot doesn't really relate to ethics that much, because it's like an intrinsically ecological and narrow view on stock status. And you know, fisheries is much bigger than just what's the size of fish this year.
Absolutely.
It might change, from, as Tom said, BMSY and UMSY are variable over time. But if we, I don't know, an idea would be like to flip the results and say like, this shows how the gold plot doesn't relate to the ethics and how we might need to develop other indicators to consider as well, instead of, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole issue about the hypothesis, really. In terms of management, it's quite interesting because the attempt is being made to relate ethics to sustainability in some way, because if you're going to get policy people to listen to you, you have to be able to make pretty hard arguments. And to wave your hands about and say, this fishery is culturally important and blah, 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 unless you're in a country like Canada where, like for example, First Nations laws are in place to favour First Nations culture. Many countries are not like that. And so to try and get policy people to listen, you have to have quite hard-nosed arguments. And that's why a lot of people in the past have gone to economics and have started talking cash, because politicians listen to cash, right? And you can do that, but we were trying to broaden that so that there is a more tangible case to put in place to policymakers saying, this is important because your fishery will not be as good in the future if you don't include the ethical considerations. And it may not work. I mean, you may be right. We may fail. I don't know.
One last question.
So, Tony, along the same lines, I'm wondering why you expect a relationship between ethics and sustainability when it's an ideal, but the reality is that it's sort of counter human nature, which is really driven by
Well, you may be right. We may be doomed.
Yeah. So we talk about it in a theoretical room, maybe what we all want, but the bottom line is making money, and that often doesn't involve ethics.
Well, in terms of sustainability, long term, maybe it does. That's my feeling.
Or maybe it should.
If we can measure the right things. I mean, I haven't got the dead right. John's got it.
Just one quick question. That longline fishery on the Chilean king clear, is that a targeted fishery or is it bycatch?
There is a small-scale fishery in Chile which targets congrio. The reason is that congrio is actually congrio chowder or baked congrio, but it's actually a national dish because the famous Chilean poet Neruda wrote a poem about congrio chowder or whatever it was. Ode to the congrio. Yeah, so it's in everybody's head. It's like salmon here, like big deal. So there is a targeted fishery for it, and that's mainly from that small-scale fishery, which is quite interesting.
Okay, thank you, Tony. There will be cake in the lobby if everybody wants to stick around and have some more discussions. And yeah, thank you.